Alright, hello and welcome to today's class. We're going to be looking at algebraic fractions and how they come up in the Junior Cert High Level Maths exam. First thing we're going to have a look at before we jump into our exam questions, we're going to have a look at this question here. Now, you might be able to jump straight to the answer, but we're just going to have a closer look at a couple of the steps you do before you get your answer of 3/8 at the very end. First of all, if we're adding those two things together, if we were to just look at these as fractions, we cannot compare those properly at the moment because they've got different denominators. So what we got to do is rewrite these fractions so that their denominators are the same. And just to remind you, your denominator is your thing at the bottom. So what you're going to do is you're going to write out your fractions again, but you want to rewrite both of these so that they've got the same denominator. So what you're going to do is you're going to get the lowest common multiple of both denominators that you have already. Now you'll be able to see that, well, you should be able to see that that will be 8. So what you want to do is rewrite your two original fractions as fractions with a as your denominator. Your first fraction here, it's fine, you don't have to add anything to it, it's 1/8, it's the exact same. But your one over here, that's where the action is going to happen. So what you need to find out is, well, how many times will your 4 here at the bottom, how many times will that go into 8? Of course, your answer is 2. So what you're doing there to get your first fraction up here, down to this here, you're multiplying your 4 by 2. And of course, if you multiply your denominator by 2, you got to do the same up top. So we already had our 8 down the bottom here. Up on top, we're going to have 2. So our question now, I'll just rewrite this over here. Your question now will say that 1/8 plus 2/8. So seeing as our fractions are the same here, we can rewrite that all over one fraction. So seeing as we're dealing with 8s, we're still dealing with 8s here, and we're going to have 1 plus 2 up on top. And that's coming from your 1 is coming from there, your plus is coming from there, and your 2 is coming from there. And of course, the last thing, you can tidy that up one bit more. 1 plus 2 will give you 3, and your 8 down there at the bottom, that's not going to change. So your answer is 3/8. Now you could have jumped straight from your first step to your last step. Most of you probably did, but the steps in between are very important. So your key point from that is to get your denominators the same. First of all, we're going to rewrite our original fractions as equivalent fractions with the same denominator. So if you look back to this one here, that's exactly what I did in my second step. So this step here, 1/8 plus 2/8 got the same denominator, and 2/8 is equivalent to your 1/4 up on top here. So as equivalent fractions, that's what I'll underline there. Rewrite, your third step is to rewrite your equation as one fraction. That's what I did over on this step here, 1/8 plus 2/8. I rewrote that as 1 plus 2 all over 8. And your last step is to tidy it up. So at the very end, I had my 1 plus 2 all over 8, and of course that was your 3/8, that was your answer. So rewrite as one fraction and tidy up. Those are your key points, and these aren't going to change for each of the questions that I'm going to do after this. So I'm going to jump into question in 2019, came up question 11, and it looks like this. So you'll notice that the difference between this one and the question that we've done just previous is that there's x's and numbers involved in this. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to write everything as fractions so that we can compare everything. So you'll notice you got your 3x plus 5 over 2. You got your x minus 4 all over 3. So that's fine. Now your 16 over here, that's just a number on its own. In order for us to be able to compare this to what's on the other side, we're going to just put that over 1. So over 1. And we're ready to start our question. We're going to go at this the exact same way as we went through our first question. So the first point, we're going to try and get our denominators the same. So you'll notice here that our denominators are 2, 3 and 1. We're going to try and find the lowest common multiple of 2, 3 and 1. So over here I'm just going to do some rough work. Lowest common multiple of 2, 3 and 1. So the lowest number that those three numbers go into is 6. Okay, so down here on my left hand side I'm just going to write 3 empty fractions here, and I'm going to put 6 down at the bottom. 6, 6 and 6. Okay, so you'll notice that just for my first fraction here, my 3x plus 5, just going to worry about that. I want to rewrite that but with 6 at the bottom. You'll notice that I have a 2 at the bottom here already. So what I need to find out is what would I multiply 2 by to get 6, and of course my answer is 3. So I've multiplied that by 3. Now I got to do the same up on top to keep that equivalent. So I'm going to multiply that by 3 as well. So just because I might run out of room here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply my 3x plus 5, which is up on top of my first fraction. I'm going to multiply that by 3, and I'm going to put my answer here, just up above the 6 of my first fraction. So 3 times 3x will give me 9x, and 3 times 5 will give me 15. So you've rewritten your first fraction here as an equivalent fraction, but with 6 as a denominator. So I'm just going to get rid of all of that because we're going to do the same to the other side here. I don't want that clogging it up. Okay, so our x minus 4 all over 3, our second fraction here, we're going to do the exact same thing. We have a 3 as our denominator, but we want 6 as a denominator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to point out that 3, if I multiply that by 2, I'm going to get my 6 down at the bottom here. If I multiply that by 2, I've got to multiply the top by 2 as well. Multiplied by 2. Okay, so up on top, what I'm going to end up with is 2 multiplied by x minus 4. So just what I'm going to do, 2 times x will give me 2x, and 2 times minus 4 will give me minus 8. Be careful with your signs there. Okay, so I'm just going to take that away as well. The last one I have to do is my 16 over the other side. Now, just be careful. I've seen a lot of cases where people forget about the 16 altogether, and that would throw your whole answer. You wouldn't get the correct one if you just left your 16 over on the left hand side, or sorry, the right hand side here of your equation. So remember, it's 16 over 1. So I need to find out, well, how would I rewrite that, but with my denominator as 6? And of course, 1 times 6 will give me the 6 at the bottom here. 16, I'm going to have to multiply the 16 by 6 as well. Now 16 times 6 is 96. So once you have that, you have rewritten your original question. You've rewritten it as the exact same things, except you've got 6 as your denominator. So the exact same things. So if we look back to our key points, we have got our denominators the same. Tick. So our next thing is rewrite the original fractions as equivalent fractions with the same denominator. We've actually done that as well. Rewrite. We're going to now write our equation as one fraction. So as one fraction, so you notice we got a 6, we got a 6, we got a 6. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that all over 6. And what I'm going to have is my 9x plus 15 plus whatever's in my second fraction. I'm just going to put that in brackets. So I'm adding all of that to my 9x plus 15. It's just a good habit to get into, because if there is a minus here, sometimes people get into trouble in that step, so I don't want that to happen to us. That's why we're putting up brackets here. It's a good habit to get into, and it's going to be equal to 96. Now in this case here, you'll notice that all the action is happening on my numerator. I got 9x plus 15, I got all of those together. So I do. And then at the bottom, I just have my 6. What we're going to do is we're going to concentrate on our numerator, because we'll be able to find out what x is equal to just by looking at that. In order to, you might say, well, where does my 6 actually go? If you have a fraction, we have a fraction here, and we've got like everything up above. If you multiply that fraction by 6 by the denominator, what you would end up with is, well, you've got what I have highlighted in yellow here. You've got that divided by 6, and then you're multiplying it by 6. What's going to happen is you're just going to be left with what's highlighted up on top. And seeing as your equation is up on top anyways, well, that's all you need in order to figure out this question. So what I'm going to have down at the bottom is I'm going to have my 9x plus 15. And now I'm going to get rid of my brackets. I'm going to have plus 2x minus 8 is equal to 96. And from here you've gotten rid of your fractions. So all you've got to do is tidy up what's at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the two things that are the same. My 9x, 9x plus 2x is 11x. You've got your 15, I'll just do that in red. You got your 15 minus 8, which will give you 7. Plus 7 is equal to 96. And I'll just finish this over here. If I take 7 away from both sides here to get the 11x on its own, I'm going to end up with 11x is equal to 89. And I'll just put that in red. I've taken 7 away here, and so I have to take 7 away there just to balance the equation. And then at the very end I've got 11x is equal to 89. Make sure you finish that off. I don't want 11x. It's asked me to find out what x actually is. It's asked me to solve the equation. So 11x is 89. I'm going to divide by 11, and I'm going to get that x is equal to 89 all over 11. And you might think, oh, like I've got a fraction as my answer, it looks a bit weird. Have I done this correctly? If you look at the question up top, it says to solve the following equation. So seeing as x was your unknown in your equation, you've got x is equal to something down here at the bottom. So in that regards, we're good. Tick. Give your answer in the form m over n, where n is an element of n, your natural numbers. So they're telling you here in this part that your answer is going to be a fraction. It's going to be m over n, so some number all over some number, and those two numbers are elements of n, so they're natural numbers. So we just make sure that that's okay. This here is like your terms and conditions, so we're just going to make sure that we've stayed in the terms and conditions. Do we have our answer as m all over n? Well, if you look at our answer down here, it's written as a fraction, m all over n. That's good. So tick. Where m and n are an element of n, your natural numbers. If you remember, your natural numbers are your positive whole numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up. Is 89 a natural number? It is. Is 11 a natural number? It is. Tick, tick, tick. Done. You've got your full marks. That question came up in 2019, question 11, and yeah, there's not much more to be said about that. A similar question came up in 2018, question 12. You'll notice that you don't have an equal sign in this. So this is not an equation, it's an expression. So you're just writing this in its simplest form. So we're going to do this the exact same way. You'll notice that the ends are at the bottom. The ends are as your denominator right now. So that sometimes poses problems to people. So I'm going to come at this the exact same way. I'm going to rewrite this, but I want the same denominator, if you remember my key steps. So what I'm going to do is in my first, if I look at my denominators, it's n minus 3 and 2n plus 5. And the reason this is so difficult to start is because your n minus 3 and your 2n plus 5, they're different, and you don't know what n is. So n is thrown a bit of a spanner in the works. What you're going to do is you're going to go and get your lowest common multiple of those two, but it's going to look a small bit different. So let's see what that might look like. Your LCM of n minus 3 and 2n plus 5. Your lowest common multiple of those is actually going to be the two of those put together, so the two of those multiplied by each other, for the simple reason that you don't know what n is at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all of this, I'll just highlight, we're going to put all of that at the bottom of our fractions as our denominators. So I'm going to have n minus 3 times 2n plus 5, and I'm going to have n minus 3 2n plus 5. Okay, so looking at our first fraction, just our first fraction here again, if we just look at our denominator, to get to this part down here, we've multiplied our denominator by 2n plus 5. So we're going to have to do the exact same thing up on top. Now up on top we already have the 2. So if we look at the bottom, as I said, we've got to multiply our n minus 3 by our 2n plus 5. We've got to do the same up on top. So just in red here, I'm going to put 2n plus 5 up on top. You'll notice for this fraction here, we've got something in common above and below. So we've got our 2n plus 5 being multiplied by our 2 up on top, and our 2n plus 5 being multiplied by our n minus 3 at the bottom. If we were to simplify this right now, we would end up right back with our 2 all over n minus 3, because we've got our 2n plus 5 above and below here. They would work against each other. They would, I suppose, cancel each other out. But for this question, like, we don't, that would just be bringing us back to square one. We don't want to go back to square one, because our question was to write the following as a single fraction in its simplest form. So remember, this step here is important to get us to our next step, to bring our fraction all together. So I'll just get rid of, I'm going to move on to my second question here, or my second fraction even, and I've got 5 all over 2n plus 5. So if you'll notice, I had my 5 over this already. I've multiplied my bottom here. Now my bottom here, my original one was 2n plus 5. I've got to multiply that by n minus 3 to get this fraction down here. So I'm going to have to do the same to the top. So I'm going to have 5 times n minus 3. Now, I know it looks a small bit more bulky or a bit more untidy than our original one, but this step, I suppose, it was necessary in order to write my fraction as a single fraction in its simplest form, and that's what we're going to do in our next step. So for my next step, I'm going to rewrite this all over as one fraction, so all over the one denominator, and my one denominator is n minus 3 2n plus 5. And up on top of my first fraction, I've got 2 times 2n plus 5. And here's what I was talking about earlier, that minus sign in the middle. Just be careful of that, because that's going to be minus. And just for the sake of this, I'm just going to swap the position of these two around in my next line here. So I'm going to have minus 5 over n minus 3. Now, just something to be aware of, that minus sign is acting on everything here. Everything. So we're just going to be careful about that in my next line. In my next line, my bottom is going to stay the same. I might actually just give myself a bit more room there. So I'm just going to section off that, and I'm just going to go up here. So at the bottom, I'm going to have n minus 3, and 2n plus 5. And at the top, just multiplying up my brackets, I'm going to have 2 times 2n, which is 4n, 2 times 5, which is 10. And now I've got minus 5. Remember now, this is a minus 5. So minus 5 times n will give me minus 5n. And minus 5 times minus 3 will give me plus 15. Now simplifying the top, I've got 4n minus 5n. So that's going to give me minus 1n. And I've got 10 plus 15, which give me plus 25. All over n minus 3 times 2n plus 5. Now if you look at that, we cannot go any further. We can't factorize the top and see if any of our factors was the same as our factors at the bottom. This right here is full marks in the marking scheme. And they also give you full marks if you multiply out your brackets at the bottom here. But this is the bare minimum that you need in order to get your full marks. Yeah, so just going back over the question, just making sure that we have it in the way that they wanted. Write the following as a single fraction. It's in a single fraction, yeah. Tick. In its simplest form, well, we can't go any further with that, so tick there as well. That's your full marks. Okay, I've got similar question came up in 2016, so I'm just going to walk through this. This is very similar to the one from 2019, so I'm just going to go through this a small bit quicker. Minus, we've got a minus there in the middle, so I'm going to put 5 all over 1 so that I can compare my denominators. My denominator is going to be 6. Very similar to the 2019 one, actually. My denominator was 6 there as well. I've multiplied my 2 by 3 here to get my 6 down here, so I'm going to do the same up on top there. And what I'm going to end up with is 2 times 2x, which will give me 4x, 2 times 4, which will give me 8. Over here, my 2 was multiplied by 3 to get my 6 at the bottom here. So I'm going to have to do the same up on top here. 3 multiplied by... I know that doesn't look like a multiplication sign, but if you can use your imaginations to pretend that that's a multiplication sign, that would be fantastic. So here on this line here, I'm going to have 3 times 5x, which is 15x, and 3 times minus 7, which is minus 21. And over at the very end here, on the right hand side of my equal sign, red pen, 1 times 6 will give me my 6, 5 times 6 will give me 30. My next line, now that I have everything over one denominator, I'm going to write it all over 6, and I'm going to start putting things up on top here. So I'm going to have my 4x plus 8. Now again, minus sign, be careful, they love throwing those minus signs in there. So we've got our minus, but remember our minus is acting on everything here. 15x minus 21. So I'm going to put my brackets up. 15x minus 21 is equal to 30. Now on this side here, I'm just going to worry about the top. I'm just going to worry about that. So I've got 4x plus 8. Now I've got my minus times 15, which is going to be minus 15x, and a minus, overshot the run rate there just a small bit. Minus by minus 21 is plus 21 is equal to 30. So to finish this off over here, I'm going to group my like terms together. 4x minus 15x is going to be minus 11x. I've got my plus 8 plus 21. That's going to be plus 29. And that's going to be equal to 30. Now remember, I want to get my x on its own, so I'm going to take 29 away from both sides. Minus 29, minus 29. I'm going to end up with minus 11x is equal to 1. And of course, I don't want my minus 11x, I want just x on its own. So I'm going to divide by minus 11, which means I have to divide by minus 11 here. And just to write my answer here in the corner, I'm going to have x is equal to 1 all over minus 11. Seeing as you have a 1, like your 1 here is a positive number divided by a negative number, well, a positive divided by a negative is going to give you a negative overall. So I'm just going to put my negative sign here on the outside. You wouldn't lose any marks if you left your minus 11, your minus sign beside your 11, or if you put it up at the 1, you wouldn't lose any marks. But I think it looks a bit neater for myself, really, if you have your minus sign on the outside here. And again, that's because your 1 here is a positive number. Positive divided by a negative is going to give you a negative number. So that right there is your answer. And again, just looking back at the question, solve the following equation. Well, it doesn't give you any guidelines. It doesn't say that your answer is going to be a fraction like our 2019 one, I think it was. But we've done everything correctly. That's in your marking scheme, and that's your full marks for that question as well. All right, 2015, this one came up. So I'll do this one quickly, and then in 2013, this is the last one that I could find. This question came up as well. So express in your simplest form. So for this one, your common denominator is going to be 12. In this one here, I've multiplied 3 by 4. So to get my 12, so I gotta multiply my 3 by 4 up on top. Or sorry, my x plus 2 times 4 up on top. So 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 2 is 8. On my other side, my 4 is going to be multiplied by 3 to get my 12 at the bottom. So I gotta do the same up on top. Up on top, I'm going to have 3 times x, which will give me 3x, and 3 times minus 3, which will give me minus 9. I'm going to bring everything over to 12. So I've got 4x plus 8. Now your minus sign comes into play. Minus, I'm going to go in brackets. Remember that minus is being applied to 3x and the minus 9. So just be careful of that. Trips a couple of people up every single time. So for this, seeing as we're writing the fraction as a single fraction, just be careful there. There's no equal sign here, so like we can't multiply everything by 12 here, because then we'd just be making this whole thing 12 times bigger, and that would change the whole thing. In our other ones, if I had an equal sign, then I'd be multiplying everything by 12 all the way across, which is fine because you're just trying to find out what x is. In this scenario here, you don't have an equal sign, so you're keeping that 12 with you, otherwise you've changed the whole thing. So on the top, I'm going to have 4x plus 8 minus times 3x is going to give you a minus 3x, and then you've got a minus times a minus 9, which will give you a plus 9 all over 12. And if you're to simplify that down, on top you've got 4x minus 3x, which is equal to x, and up on top as well you got your plus 8 plus 9, so that's going to give you 17, and that's going to be all over 12. That's your full marks in the marking scheme as well. You've written it as a single fraction, you've written it in its simplest form. The last question I could find was your 2013 one, and I'm going to leave that one for you to do. I've done quite a few examples there, and they were all the times that your algebraic fractions came up in the last, well, that's 2013, it's 2020 now, so in the last 7 years. So if you can wrap your head around those, that's absolutely fantastic. That's it from me today. Okay, thank you.